Welcome back to the Morbid Moonlight 31 Days of Halloween, where every day this month we're going to be reviewing a different film featuring legendary horror star Felissa Rose, working our way through a career one film at a time, picking out the high points and hopefully avoiding the dross, and we will end up with a history of Felissa Rose in 31 horror films. So last time we looked at 2006's Satan's Playground, and this time we're jumping ahead a bit to 2009 and a film called Cesar and OTTO'S Summer Camp Massacre. Just quickly, I'll fill you in on the stuff in between. After Satan's Playground, Felissa Rose did a film called Under Surveillance, which was released on DVD as, I think, Dark Chamber, which was written and directed by a guy called Dave Campfield, this kind of urban horror thriller. I'm skipping it for now just because it's not that much of a horror film really, but remember the name of its director, Dave Campfield, because that name's going to crop up again very soon. After Under Surveillance, there's a few more small parts for Felissa Rose. There was Evil Ever After, which was this kind of sloppy comedy about a reformed cannibal in 2006. Dead and Gone, which is this kind of dreary little cabin in the woods film in 2008 that she's barely in, to be honest. And 2008's Psycho Sleepover, which is actually, I've got to say, a pretty entertaining film. It's a little bit messy, but it is a lot of fun, in which Felissa Rose plays a newsreader for about 30 seconds. See, the biggest omission here, you might think, the one that I should definitely be covering, is 2008's Return to Sleepway Camp, a sequel to Felissa Rose's most iconic film, which saw her take up the role of Angela Baker once more, brought to you by the same director as the original. Surely that's the movie that I should be talking about. Well, the problem is, for all the hype, A, it's not a great film by any means, but more importantly, B, Felissa Rose is actually barely in it at all, which seems a little bit puzzling. It generally gets a bad rap from fans, and I personally much prefer Sleepway Camps 2 and 3, even without Felissa Rose. It's a mystery to me why they decided to go the route that they did, but Sleepway Camp's just not really the kind of franchise that is in any way consistent. Anyway, that takes us up to the point in time in which Felissa Rose plays an adult camp counsellor in a film that pays more homage to Sleepway Camp than the official sequel did, and that film is a goofy little try-hard comedy that goes by the name Cesar and OTTO'S Summer Camp Massacre, although some of the DVDs just trim the title down to simply Summer Camp Massacre. So Cesar and Otto are a pair of lovable, stupid lugs, clearly intended to be the indie horror, straight-to-DVD versions of Abbott and Costello for the 21st century, parodying horror film cliches whilst throwing out straightforward, simple but harmless comedy routines. Cesar, who's the one with more dialogue, who's more or less the main character, is a failed actor with delusions of his own self-importance, and he is played by none other than the writer and director of Summer Camp Massacre, Mr. Dave Campfield. For my money, he's a little bit too try-hard. He kind of takes a run at everything and tries to compensate for what I'd say is basically a lack of obvious comedic talent, although his character is given as many crutches as possible to help him out. But the general tone is silly enough that it doesn't matter, and unlike a trauma film, the gags aren't just gross out and self-mockery, but the kind of ultra-simplistic stuff that you get in cartoons, which makes it kind of hard to really dislike this film that much. It's a basic ultra-low-budget spoof of your 80s summer camp slasher film, and even though it's a bit on the saggy side, the main weapon in its comedic arsenal, really, is actually Felissa Rose herself, and her own willingness to play up to her knowing fanbase, something that can go either way, but in this case, it really does work well. To be honest, if you take Felissa Rose out of this film, you've not got a whole lot left, and when your movie rests solely on your one well-known horror star being willing to take the piss out of their own work, then it just goes to show you how game Felissa Rose really is. But like I said, Felissa gets a chance to work through a load of Sleepway Camp in-jokes, from doing that stare, to jokes about her having a cock, and even just on the nose, hey, you used to be in Sleepway Camp, didn't you, stuff. And it's great, in part at least because Felissa is, with all due respect, head and shoulders above everybody else around her in terms of acting. I think that even Dave Campfield knows it, as she's given the royalty treatment, complete with this awesome entrance, and the chance to thesp it up in her scenes whilst everyone around her is busy mugging and doing their own little shticks. And as we know, Felissa Rose isn't somebody that's afraid to poke fun at herself, which is cool, but as I said, this is a more loving homage to Sleepaway Camp than Return to Sleepaway Camp, and that means that fans of that film should definitely check this one out, if just for the impressive brace of blatant in-jokes. We've also got Felissa Rose's IRL husband here, Darren Miller, playing a guy called Dick. And yeah, that's the sort of film we're talking about. We've also got a cameo from Brink Stevens, more or less literally phoning it in here, and generally, the vibe of Summer Camp Massacre is that of a pretty feeble school play that's sort of fun in spite of, or perhaps because of, just how kind of lame it all is. This ain't trying to be art, it knows exactly where it's pitching itself. Personally, I think the comedic timing isn't great here, but as this kind of fun, silly little bit of fluff stacked with some nice Felissa Rose treats for the aficionados, there's definitely worse ways that you could spend your time. In terms of the Felissa factor, how important Felissa Rose is to this film, I'd give it a 4 out of 10, in that she's not on screen that much, but when she is, she's great, because she gets a chance to play with her own image. In terms of overall quality of the film itself, I'm sadly going to have to give Summer Camp Massacre also a 4 out of 10, just because it's pretty lame all things considered, and it even feels a little bit of a stretch at just over 70 minutes, but if you're in the right mood, I think this could carry along quite nicely. I've got nothing malicious whatsoever to say about it. It's really just that I didn't find it especially that funny. It's harmless, but it's just not particularly that funny. And weirdly, there's a few sequels here, including a couple of short films, that actually might be the best possible length for this duo to do their thing without overstaying their welcome. In terms of official film-length sequels, we've got Cesar and Otto's Deadly Christmas and Cesar and Otto's Paranormal Halloween a few years down the line. Both feature Felissa Rose playing different characters, probably, I'm guessing, in just cameo roles from what I can gather, given how many other well-known horror names crop up in the cast list of those films. Whether or not I'll give them a look remains to be seen, but I'm thinking probably not unless I'm really struggling to make up the numbers. But if you do give this a watch and end up enjoying it, then feel free to check out the sequels and let me know if they're any good. Unfortunately, due to the fact that they're pretty niche, the DVDs aren't that easy to come across, although I did manage to rent the VOD from Amazon, which suggests that we're getting past the weird obscure stuff that even Amazon Prime doesn't have listed, and onto the part of Felissa Rose's career where the films just get that little bit easier to get a hold of. It's a shame actually that the fan base for the Cesar and Otto films never grew enough to warrant a nice 3-film box set, maybe with a 4th disc with the shorts on it too. I mean, that's an idea for whoever's got the rights to release these films right now to think about, especially given that horror fans have got a reputation as being daft for sequels and franchises. I mean, if they ever did bring out a box set, I would probably buy it, to be honest, just because, I mean, they are fun, they're sort of silly. And with that said, I reckon that should wrap things up for day 5 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any Felissa Rose horror films that you desperately want me to review, please let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to review it by the end of the month. Please consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. That would be a great help, and I will see you back here tomorrow with day 6 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose. Hope we'll see you then.